Welcome back to London on this glorious October's day. Behind me is St Paul's Cathedral, basking in glorious autumnal sunshine. But now it's time to talk Japan. I've been speaking to Colin Asher about all things JPY and BoJ. So there's been a change in personnel at the BoJ recently. I'm sure most people aren't that familiar with Japanese central bankers, but what does that mean for the Bank of Japan and monetary policy?
Well, I think at the moment it really means quite little. There are two new board members. They're both in the private sector. They're both private sector economists. I think they're both closely attuned to economic developments, and obviously in the last couple of months or so the economy's taken a turn for the worse. They're both on record as being at the more dovish end of the BoJ spectrum, but I don't think the real battle for the soul of the BoJ begins until you get some changes at the top, and the governor of the BoJ, Shirakawa, his term ends in April next year. His deputy governor, one of them ends in March, and the other one ends, I think, in October. So there'll be very large changes in personnel at the BoJ in the coming 12 months, and I think the key change is obviously that of the governor.
The Bank of Japan surprised everyone in September by taking part in asset purchase and joining the party, as it were, after the ECB and the Fed did their big asset purchases. Is this something that we're going to see more often this year?
I think we've seen quite a lot of it already. If you look back in the last couple of years or so, the BoJ has moved often in lockstep with the Fed, most decisively I think back in late 2010 when the Fed introduced QE2. The BoJ saw it was coming in and went the weekend before. So I think to some extent the BoJ is locked in a kind of competitive easing with the Fed, and I think especially now the economy started to turn, Japanese political developments and policy developments are much more sensitively attuned to the strength of the yen. And I think that that they're very worried about strengthening yen. Consequently, after the Federal Reserve move, the BoJ followed suit. And I don't think it was such a surprise, given the weakness that we'd seen in the economy.
Politically, what's the situation like with the BoJ? Are the politicians of Japan putting more pressure on them to take a more active role in trying to stimulate the economy?
Yes, I think they clearly are, and you could see that in today's meeting. There's a two-day meeting that started today, terminates tomorrow. The economy minister, Seiji Maehara, will attend that meeting, and that's the first time someone at the ministerial level has attended the meeting since Heizo Takanaka back in April 2003. I looked at the minutes of that meeting this morning, and actually Takanaka's presence doesn't seem to have really galvanized the BoJ back then to take any additional actions. And I doubt actually that Maehara's attendance will do the same. Will probably have a limited effect this morning and tomorrow, as I think the BoJ is probably quite confident that it's because it moved last month. There's nothing really to be doing this month. And the other thing is that at the end of this month, the BoJ will be revising its forecasts, and it's much more likely that if there is to be any policy action this month, that it comes at the later meeting alongside those forecast changes rather than the meeting this week.
Do you think there'll be a fundamental shift in the way that BoJ acts? Because plenty of people would say that what the Fed is doing is going beyond their mandate. Do you think that the BoJ is going to be starting to be more like the Fed?
Not under the current government. I think in the current environment you have Noda, who's an ex-finance minister himself, and he was quite cautious with regard to the BoJ when he was finance minister. So I think there's neither pressure from the politicians. Well, there is quite a lot of pressure from the politicians, but with Noda at the head, I think he's able to fend off that pressure. And with Shirakawa at the BoJ, he's been relatively conservative. Obviously, he's taken a number of steps, and you couldn't describe him as completely conservative. But I think in terms of the way he's seen by the Japanese political establishment, he seems to be more conservative than central bankers elsewhere, certainly in regard to Ben Bernanke. And so I think that the Japanese political establishment wants someone more in the Bernanke mould. And I think when you get that change of governor, when they look to appoint somebody, they'll be looking for somebody who certainly has a less conservative reputation.
Well, London is certainly at its best today, but unfortunately that's all we've got time for this edition of London Direct. Goodbye for now.